Let me start by asking you a question. When you think about the things you're certain of, the things you know to be true, do you trust more the answers that science gives you or the answers that religion, that faith gives you? Let me ask you another question. When you think about the way a society should be governed, do you think that democracy is the way to go? It's the right way, the best way, the most efficient way? Or do you think that it's better to have an aristocracy, a monarchy, where you have a select group or even one person who is in charge of society, who makes the decisions and the rest of us obey? If you answered science and if you answered democracy, which is probably nearly all of us, you are definitely a child of what's called the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was a philosophical and scientific revolution that occurred starting in the 1700s and really hit its strides in the 1800s. And as you can see right in the word enlighten, light, it presupposes that there was a time when people did not live in the light. And all of a sudden, around the time that science, the scientific method came into being, that people began to live in the light. The Enlightenment is actually the time in history when the Dark Ages were named for what they are, the Dark Ages. For people of the Enlightenment, for scientists and philosophers, the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, were a time of ignorance, superstition, people who looked to rituals and what they call magic, who believed in the power of spirits and God in their life. And the Enlightenment said, no, humans, through their own intelligence, through logic and reason, and through discovery, can answer all the riddles of life. There are no mysteries. To look to religion to solve the mysteries of the why of life is no longer necessary. Science, physics, chemistry, biology, these disciplines can solve all of our problems. Similarly with government. One famous French philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, said, "Everywhere men are born free, and yet everywhere they are in chains." Meaning that we are inherently born free creatures, self-autonomous creatures, and yet governments and systems keep us enslaved, keep us oppressed. And so the Enlightenment, very much influenced the American Revolution, led to an overthrow of the old system. And some of that old system, a lot of it actually, was religion. Specifically, of course, Christianity. So the church tended to react to the Enlightenment, especially the leadership of the church. And it reacted in a negative way. It did not welcome the Enlightenment. It saw the Enlightenment as giving a false source of knowledge and certainty, that science really can't answer all the questions. And one pope who led the way was Pope Pius IX. In fact, he picked up the moniker Pio Nono, used a play on the Italian word for nine, and they made it into no-no, because his answer to everything in the modern world was no, no. And if you need to hear me say it again, it's still no. So Pius really led kind of a counter-revolution from within the Catholic Church against the world. In fact, he's sort of called the author of the fortress mentality church. So I want you to think of a castle. Just right now, imagine a castle. And for Pius IX, the church was the castle. And the world was what's dangerous out there. It's those forests that have those wild creatures. But within the castle, the church, you can be safe. So Catholics, he would say, please come and preserve your faith within the castle of the church. We will be a fortress. We will stand strong while the rest of the world goes its merry way. You should be thinking right now that Pius IX represents the fleeing from model of church and culture. What he's basically saying is that these people who think they are enlightening people are leading them ultimately into error, leading them into their own perdition. And Pius IX did this in two key ways. In 1864, he published a document called the Syllabus of Errors. And the Syllabus of Errors outlined several propositions. I believe it was over 70 propositions that he identified, that Pius identified as wrong. And a couple of these that probably will surprise you is that he said that public education is not suitable for Catholic parents. He wanted all Catholic parents to send their kids to a Catholic school, because within the public schools, Catholic values would no longer be valued. They would be endangered. And I know even as a kid, this was still sort of a part of the Catholic Church. I can remember I had one friend in the entire neighborhood who went to a public school. Every other friend went to our local parish school. And with this one friend, it was sort of always a bit of a mystery, like, why is he going there? Are his parents bad people? Now, you probably know many Catholic families who send their kids to New Trier or to Glenbrook South or any number of public schools. Under Pius IX, that would not have been allowed. He would have said, that's wrong, that's bad. You are a bad Catholic for doing that. Another thing that Pius IX said in the Syllabus of Errors is that the Church has the right to impose its beliefs on others, to impose its values on society. That because the Church is truth and error has no rights, therefore, the Church has the right to try to suppress errors. That, again, in a democratic society like our own, might be a very surprising, even shocking thing to hear. But Pius IX really believed in an enmeshed model. The Church has the right to impose its values. But because the Enlightenment, societies all over the Western world, United States, France, England, Spain, they were all, to one degree or another, saying, no, there's church here, there's state here. In fact, generally, we want church just to disappear. That's really what most of the philosophers, and the scientists wanted. The church is a bad thing. It leads people to superstition. But we'll tolerate it as long as you guys just sort of mind your own business. And Pius said, no. We believe we should be able to, in the name of truth, impose the true values on everyone else. Because he couldn't get away with that, he said, okay, church, we are separating. We are moving away from society. Pius IX did this same flight from model and even showing an enmeshed sort of attitude in the First Vatican Council, which he called. The First Vatican Council was in the 1860s as well. And during that council, two things were asserted. The first thing that was asserted was that the existence of God can be proved through the use of human reason alone. I want you to think, what about the Enlightenment would that have countered? In other words, what about a declaration that God can be known by reason would a person of the Enlightenment have rejected? I want you to answer that tomorrow for class. But it also then declared the Pope to be infallible. Infallible means incapable of making an error. And the Council, Vatican Council, was very careful to put three conditions around infallibility. One, the Pope could only be talking about an issue of faith or morals. So if Pope Francis, for instance, got up tomorrow and said he thought that Newtonian physics were wrong, it's not an infallible statement. He has to be talking about a matter of faith or morality. Second condition, he has to be talking ex cathedra. That means in his role as Peter. He is assuming the leadership role of the church in that moment. So again, if Pope Francis, let's say, just in a chat with young people, says something like, oh, Twitter's a bad thing. Well, it's not infallible. He's just having a little chat in Vatican Square, and he's telling young people about his opinion, his thought at the moment. Not infallible. He'd have to stand up at the chair of Peter and say, it is immoral to go on Twitter. But there's even a third condition. The Pope with infallibility has got to explicitly say, I am binding every Catholic to believe this everywhere in the world. So going back to the Twitter example, the Pope would have to say Twitter's immoral. He'd have to do it from the chair of Peter. And he'd have to explicitly say, and every Catholic must believe this, must believe it. So you can see, though, this is Pius IX's way of saying to the Enlightenment, the church still matters. It has power. It has influence. It can bind all Catholics to believe something. Now, as a matter of fact, popes have rarely used this. In fact, most theologians think there have only been 2 times where the Pope has exercised papal infallibility. But it's there on the books, and it's part of Catholic teaching. And again, it's meant to really say The church will be the bastion. It will be the fortress of truth against this world filled. Yes, there's progress out there. People are making progress in a material sense. They're knowing more, but they are all the more ignorant of what really makes up human happiness, of what really brings humans value and worth and dignity. And this sort of fortress mentality class really lasted well into the 1950s and 60s. I can remember when I was a kid, President Kennedy, the only Catholic who's ever been president, won by a sliver, and it was because many non-Catholics in the United States wondered if a Catholic would owe his first allegiance to the Pope. In other words, is the Pope really going to run the United States? And some people were sort of wondering, was Kennedy of this mindset, Pius IX's mindset, where the church has the responsibility, the right to impose its values on others?